President Trump attacking the Mueller probe and also demanding an investigation of the people who are investigating him. I'm going to ask former federal prosecutor Roland Riopel whether he's ever seen anything like we're seeing before us. Then Democrats, they got a deep bench of possible candidates for New York Attorney General, but the Republicans, they don't have any big names in this conversation. We'll explore why that's the case when it comes to statewide office in New York. Also, an inside look at the shenanigans that went on at Trump University from someone who used to work there, and now he's got a book about the place. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. We'll have all that plus developments out in Long Island with the Mangano case. Now, to our top story. Right after President Trump sent a slew of tweets blasting the Justice Department, the Mueller investigation and the FBI all seemingly together, he even demanded a probe of the Mueller probe. The president, he met with top officials at those very agencies. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein returning from a meeting with President Trump and FBI Director Chris Wray, where he accepted a tall order. Investigate your own agency for possible political bias against the Trump campaign in the Russia investigation. Speaker Ryan backing the White House.
Well, I think it's important that we just let the truth come out on all these things.
At the meeting, Rosenstein agreed to expand the Inspector General's current investigation into possible irregularities at the FBI to include if the agency improperly spied on the Trump campaign. They also agreed to turn over classified documents relating to the investigation for review by congressional leaders. Republicans, they've been demanding the documents, but the DOJ, they've been reluctant to turn them over because of leaks.
The most important thing is to see how the Justice Department responds. And I think both Rod Rosenstein and Chris Wray responded the right way by not overreacting.
The president's demand comes on the heels of a New York Times report claiming that the FBI secretly sent an informant to meet with campaign officials who were suspected of having contact with Russians before the election. The FBI will not say, one way or the other, if they had sent such an informant, but Democrats are already blasting the president for his demands.
That he would issue such an absurd and abusive demand based on no evidence shows just how little regard the president has for the rule of law.
Now, this is not all about just Donald Trump. A lot of other people are also involved in the Mueller probe, as you well know. And we can add some new names here. Start with a familiar face, former campaign manager Paul Manafort. He's facing several federal charges, but he's pleading not guilty to all of them, but the deck definitely seems stacked against him. His case is now moving forward that after a judge turned down a request for dismissal, a lot of people are wondering whether it's not when, not if, he will flip and cooperate with the government. Then there's Donald Trump Jr. and his meeting with officials from the UAE and Saudi Arabia. This one took place 3 months before Election Day. It was at Trump Tower, just like his infamous meeting with the Russians. This time, Donald Jr. met with an Israeli social media expert and officials from the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Time says those emissaries wanted to help Trump win. Now Mueller's team is also looking into what happened there and, maybe not too shockingly, also money that also flowed to his brother-in-law. Here to discuss that and more, federal prosecutor Roland Riopel, former federal prosecutor. And Roland, I got to start with another headline that just came down and people attaching maybe some real significance to this. Michael Cohen's business partner, he's now cooperating with the feds after he was looking at real jail time here, I guess over tax evasion. The significance of that and how much more that could really put the screws here to Cohen to flip as well.
Well, yeah, if your business partner is now cooperating with the government, you are now in real trouble. So Mr. Cohen, who was in it up to his eyeballs before, is now totally underwater. And if his business partner is cooperating and providing evidence against him, he's in terrible trouble and has to think hard about whether it's in his best interest to cooperate too.
Let's get to really what's happened over the last, 72, 96 hours, Roland, where the president, I hereby demand, forgetting even the language and the histrionics. First of all, I can't even follow the logic of this in that if anybody was hurt by the feds in the run-up to the election, and specifically Comey at the time, it was Hillary Clinton by his decision 10 days before the election to do what he did. The facts are unimpeachable that the campaign, the Trump campaign, was warned repeatedly by the FBI that there was real concern with the Russians, interference, etc. They never made that information public before the election. The White House knew about it as well. They didn't want to be seen as playing favorites. They kept it all quiet. So if there's this cabal or concerted effort by law enforcement to get the Trumps with the spy and everything else to infiltrate, they sure had a funny way of really leveraging that come November of 16. The facts don't support this. Forget about the rest of it.
That's absolutely right, Richard. You know, as I've learned the facts from the newspaper reporting, the Trump campaign was warned about Russian interference in the election. The FBI then got word from Papadopoulos through the Australian ambassador that the Trump campaign was apparently working with the Russians to dig up dirt with Hillary Clinton. And then the FBI did what is a really garden variety, ordinary investigative step of having an informant meet with members of the campaign who were suspected to be dealing with Russia, including people like Carter Page, who had been suspected of dealing with Russia for years. The FBI sent an informant to speak to members of the Trump campaign to learn what it could about the collusion with Russia. That is a totally routine and ordinary law enforcement technique that's done every day in every kind of investigation. So there's no reason for this to upset anyone, particularly given the predicate for it, which was real evidence of collusion. I just don't get where the outrage is coming from here.
And what's interesting is both Gorka and Carter Page, even in conservative outlets, when they were asked about this, they said it were garden variety meetings. There was no grand subterfuge, and it really seemed more like professorial conversations. Yeah. And they were the ones, apparently, that had these conversations. But what surprised me a little bit was the DOJ this time capitulated and said, fine. They gave the name and everything else. And we should go back, and you're better at it than I am, Roland. Every time the president has had a tantrum, the Department of Justice hasn't basically given him what he wanted before, but they did it this time. Was he politically almost in an impossible situation that he had to do this, or do you think he made a mistake here by deciding to say fine?
I am very concerned by Mr. Rosenstein's actions here. The Trump White House should have gotten a stiff arm on this one and should have been told, we don't do that here. If that caused Rosenstein to be fired, so be it. I am very troubled by the fact that he was so quick to give up the identity of this informant when Trump put the heat on through Twitter. It seems to me like this is a career bureaucrat fighting and struggling to save his job above all else, and that's very troubling, because if that is what happened, then Trump is at the point where he can wrap this fellow around his finger and get him to do anything, and then we're all in trouble.
And that brings me to the broader question, Roland, of the integrity of American law enforcement. I don't remember it being ever under this assault that it is right now, certainly by our own commander-in-chief. Talk about how unprecedented what we're seeing is, and from your end, as a guy who put a lot of his professional career in this, the consequences and maybe lasting damage for it.
Yeah, this is really we're in a really terrible situation here, where the President of the United States is attacking in an unjustified way the FBI and the Department of Justice, and by doing so, he is very seriously eroding their credibility, at least with his base, which is a significant chunk of the population. He seems to be aided and abetted in this by the legislature, which is not doing anything to try to rein Mr. Trump in. And if they are going to let him get away with this kind of behavior, and indeed through people like Devin Nunes, follow it up with their own ridiculous allegations about law enforcement chicanery, if they're going to tolerate that and enable it, then ultimately the FBI and the Department of Justice's credibility are going to be so destroyed in such a large chunk of the population that it'll be very difficult for them to operate. You know, the FBI has to be able to testify in open court to members of the public who are sitting on juries and has to be believed. If they're not going to be believed without any proof of wrongdoing, then we're all in trouble because the FBI is going to have a difficult time obtaining convictions of real criminals.
You know, maybe part of the calculation was, and I'm not trying to get in the mind of Rosenstein, but okay, I'm going to lay this out. Everyone will see there's no there to this, and then we'll be able to move past it. I don't think he assumed that only Republicans were going to get to view this. And then think about I'm going through the 3 steps here. Devin Nunes and Cruz sees it. I mean, they could see basically there's nothing here. They're still going to go out in front of the cameras and say basically, you know, that this is Watergate redo. Then you're going to put Chris Wray in the impossible situation, the FBI director, and maybe even Coates, you know, where they're going to have to go out and say they're misrepresenting what's in there, or maybe even leak the document. I mean, it's also avoidable and also shameful to my point. And I don't care who anyone voted for. This is so against the national self-interest, what folks are doing right now, all for CYA.
It is. And really what I think is happening is Trump is attempting with the help of people like Devin Nunes and certain elements of the press, I think what he's really trying to do is to pummel the FBI and the Department of Justice so thoroughly that they become lapdogs to him and effectively are not pushing back against him, as they did not in this case. And if we get to that point where, with the connivance of the legislature, he has taken away the real independence of these agencies and made them his own vassals, then we're in real trouble, because Trump will order them to investigate political enemies, as he seems to be doing. He'll order them to do things to hurt his rivals and those he doesn't like. The next thing you know, Jeff Bezos will somehow be under investigation for defrauding the post office or some nonsense like that. You know, when he gets control of the Department of Justice and the FBI, as he seems to be moving to do, then we're going to be in real trouble.
And then we'll find out who the Patriots are and who they're not. It's one thing for, especially in the Senate, them to say, well, we don't need legislation to protect Mueller and the integrity of the investigation because no one would ever make a move on Mueller. I'll take that bet 7 days and twice on Sunday. But if that happens, where will the Senate and how many senators will be able to draw a line and say that's a line too far? And if anybody doubts at all, they should have listened to the Homeland Security, the head of the Homeland Security today, when she was asked about what his established fact that the Russians were trying to have Trump win, that every intelligence agency has said, and even the Republican chair of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate, she said, yeah, we're not sure of that. There's no evidence to point to that. So this alternative universe we live in gets worse and worse.
Yeah, these are bureaucrats trying to preserve their own position. And they know to do that, you have to placate Trump. And if he gets to the point where he's got the FBI and the Department of Justice as lapdogs, then, you know, the Senate, which has already been pretty fuzzy, frankly, and not really doing any real oversight of Mr. Trump, and the House, forget about it. You know, the legislature is failing in its duty here. And if he now co-opts these independent agencies, the Department of Justice and the FBI, he'll be able to intimidate the legislature even further and it will totally cease to function as an independent overseer of the presidency.
Really scary stuff. Roland, as always, my
Very
friend,
much
thank you
so.
very much for the time.
Thank you, Richard. It's always a pleasure to be here.
All right, folks, when we come back, we'll bring our panel out to take a look at not just the Russia probe, but also the politics surrounding this. If possible, it's getting even more politicized. We'll discuss that and more after this.